and it's my sincere pleasure to introduce Jennifer Mankoff, who's the Richard Ladner Professor at UW in computer science. She is a dear collaborator of mine. I have the fortune to share right now, and has been a great source of inspiration both in work in fabrication as well as in accessibility. So it is really exciting for me to kind of like have Jennifer kind of do the closing keynote of our conference today. Jennifer, thank you so much for making time and being here. Really looking forward to your presentation, and the stage is all yours.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here and glad that I was able to join you. So I will just share my slides. I think that's working, yes?
Yes, this looks good. Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm trying to figure out, cool. Okay, let me know if there's any issues with the captions. I'm going to talk about the work that the Center for Research and Education on Accessible Technology and Experiences, or CREATE, which I direct, has been doing in the realm of accessibility and AI. And I just want to start by talking about accessibility in this talk. So if you would like a copy of the slide deck, I've put a QR code and a tiny URL there, and I can also put it in chat if that's helpful, although that would be hard to navigate. So I'll just leave this up for a second. So it's tinyurl.com/Cornell-AI access, and I will do my best to describe important images. The titles should be unique, fonts are hopefully large enough. Just want to check if there's any other access needs I should be attending to in this talk. And I can't see anyone. I don't know how to go back and forth between. Thank you. Okay, great. I don't have any view into Zoom while I'm talking. I'm not in my normal location for talks, so please just speak up if there's something I need to know. Great. So I just want to start by saying I know that this is an audience that is familiar with disability, but I like to talk about my perspective on disability. Disability is obviously many different things to many different people, but I want to highlight that it is everyday life for many of us with disabilities, right? It is not just confined to the spaces that we normally see accessibility research working in. It is part of everything that we experience and do. And it is part of that for 1 in 5 people in the US and beyond. It is also, to me, power, independence, inventiveness. So I have some images here of wheelchair athletes, of people engaged in right to repair related work on their wheelchairs, of a deaf person in a professional context signing in a meeting, and a teenager who has created a glitter gun to use with their limb difference arm. So lots of different ways that we experience and express disability. And it is also an ongoing fight for civil rights. We are currently 50 years out from the ADA Capitol crawl, where disabled activists crawled up the stairs to the nation's Capitol building because at the time there was no legal structure for ensuring that architecture was accessible or digital resources were accessible. And ramps, whether to a building or to digital resources, are incredibly important for engagement in every aspect of everyday life. Yet over 90% of Android apps miss basic accessibility features, and over 80% of Fortune 500 websites are also not accessible. And this is old data, but there's no, I have no confidence that it has changed since these numbers were collected. In addition, today, the civil right to accessibility is under attack. What does that mean? Digital ramps are at risk. Oh, I apologize. There's a missing URL in my talk. But we saw telehealth cuts starting on March 31st, remote work options that became available only because of COVID being canceled without considering access needs. On the US government, like national websites for inclusive design patterns, web content has been removed. Programs that help ensure that disabled people have access to digital materials in high school and college, and support for transitioning through the educational structures and into the workforce are being canceled or cut. And the recent DOJ rule on digital accessibility that addresses accessible barriers faced by students and members of society in many different settings is currently at risk. Prejudice is also on the rise. If you haven't heard the term eugenics, it refers to an old policy that disabled people maybe should not be born or should otherwise be taken out of society. And that reappeared during COVID when people with intellectual disabilities were lower on the list for life-saving care than other people, for example. And we see disabled people being openly mocked by President Trump today as well. Disabled workers hired under disability hiring programs and disabled scientists are being fired. Funding is being cut for science on accessibility, among many other topics. And DEIA is being canceled not only federally, but also in states and businesses and academic research. And this is both new and an old story. As resources become scarce, it is harder to access accessible technology. Organizations then gatekeep access, what counts as disabled and what counts as AT. So in a study that we did with an organization that serves lower income multilingual families that's going to be presented at Assets this fall, one person told us, I was trying to give one of my families a talking flashcards tablet where you put a card on the back and it will tell you, say, an apple. I said it's educational, and the insurance company said, no, it's a toy, and refused to pay for it. We also see that these kinds of resource scarcities create timeline gaps where getting a device funded requires a lot of written documentation, time we're not paid for, and it also involves hours understanding and implementing the process. These kinds of things, impact how families access AT and whether they can access it. And something that came out in our study was a concept that we call minor resistance, where families would be selective about whether they complied with the AT they were offered, strategic about refusing it, and covert in their disobedience. So for example, even if a school said, this is the device we recommend, families are catching on that it comes from a pool of maybe one or two devices, one person told us. So they're also doing their own assessments to have a device that's theirs, that they can control, can edit, and do whatever they want with. So you may be wondering what this has to do with AI. And the answer is, first of all, that in these circumstances, people with disabilities have to continue a very long-standing tradition of solving their own problems. And AI is one gateway to doing that. But I also bring these things up because we often hear people talk about technology as if it's neutral, and the kinds of biases and prejudices and problems that lead to the sorts of events and decisions that I was just featuring also show up in the technology that we use. And I want to talk about AI from both of those perspectives. So there's been a lot of recent research on how people with disabilities are using AI, some of it from CREATE and some from other groups, including looking at specific populations, so people with neurodiversity, blind and visually impaired, deaf and hard of hearing users. And there's a lot to learn from what's happening because whether or not we are ready for it, disabled people are adopting and using AI right now. And we see a positive shift to supporting new domains of access, such as communication support that existing populations outside of a small subset were not provided by the structures currently in place, as well as new approaches to access. So not only does a person with who's blind can they use AI to make up for the lack of image description that is often present in digital resources, they can now approach understanding images in a new way. For example, asking additional questions to get more details about an image or to investigate a specific piece of the image that they are interested in, which might not have been represented in the alt text. And I'm showing an image at left, by the way, of the final thing, which is new domains of everyday life, such as creativity support, that are often overlooked by access processes that maybe because they are under-resourced or just because of people's assumptions about people with disabilities, often focus only on critical activities of daily living and workforce participation. One could argue creativity falls within that, but a lot of times we see people focusing in on entry-level work as well. So what I'm showing at left is something that came out of one of our studies where a disabled person who had a barrier to visualizing chose to use an AI to give them support in sort of co-designing ideas for an amigurumi doll of a dog wearing purple, relevant to their institution. So I will say again that the idea that people might solve their own accessibility problems is new perhaps to how we think about designing AT, but it is certainly not new to disabled experiences. And so we did interviews also going to be presented at Assets 2025. And the pictures on my slides at bottom right, I have pictures of the collaborators. This was led by Ashka Desai, for example. The innovators that we interviewed, disabled folks who had successfully brought products to market in some form, talked about creating technology that met their specific needs, and in the process also building solidarity, community, and engaging with the culture, disabled culture around things like disabled knowledge. So one person told us, for example, there have been many contributions to the NVDA project, which is an open source screen reader that many blind people use on Windows machines. It's not really just a software project. It's a movement. It's a community. NVDA is by users for users. And in addition, in the process of doing this, the innovators we spoke with dismantled norms and revised structures and systems to ensure that they had real world impact. So, for example, when deaf people first started trying to solve the problem of remote communication, they didn't just build TTY terminals, they also changed the way phone calls are delivered or the way phone systems work to ensure that that information could be shared at scale. And an example from our interviews, Caption Fish created a movement that put butts in seats and showed theater owners the deaf community had purchasing power. This was a system for supporting captioning in movie theaters. So those folks that we interviewed in that paper were experts with a great deal of resources at hand. But I would argue that AI puts some of the same power in everyone's hands. It allows disabled people to address needs that are unpredictable, changeable, and individual, to go beyond basic needs that leave a lot out, to address some basic needs when legal and ethical requirements are not being met, such as some of the issues that I raised earlier in the talk. And it provides for real-time agency, control, and flexibility, and even makes some existing solutions better, such as the image description example that I gave. But it also comes with risks, and I want to highlight some direct risks to disabled people that happen when a disabled person is directly interacting with AI. We'll talk in a moment also about indirect risks. So one direct risk is that AI may essentially define who is human, whether or not it is correct. So in an article from 2020, Sean Kane discusses having to falsify data because of assumptions about height and weight. He's a little person. And in a recent study that we have in submission right now, a blind participant told us, telling AI that I'm blind, I have to remind it. For example, I took a screenshot and I said, what is selected? And it goes, the item with the red check marks next to them are selected. And I said, hey, genius, you're talking to a blind person. So this example shows that, one of the issues that disabled people face with AI is that even when they give it the context about the accessibility needs that they have, it may just completely lose track of that information. Another issue that we see is that AI has built in assumptions based on the data it's trained on about who counts as disabled. And I would argue that these assumptions come because of assumptions that are built into the work that we do as a community in part. So most of the work that has been published in accessibility up until 2020, all of it in Assets at least, and since then much of it, has implicitly assumed that disabled people are white, affluent for the most part, and also monolingual. And when we look at people who have a wider variety of lived experience outside of just their disability, I would also say a lot of that work has assumed that people have one disability only, and may also assume that people are not collaborating with other disabilities or with non-disabled people. When we look more deeply, we see that all of these assumptions are false. Disabled people exist in every part of life and have often multiple disabilities and other identity characteristics. And so in this example, for example, from CHI 2025, we looked at multilingualism in captioning. And we found that fluency is a variable concept, and basic assumptions that are built into many captioning systems, that somebody only cares to see captions in one language, that they are fluent in that language and the script of that language, and that they prefer a certain language to be dominant, are all incorrect when you talk to disabled people who use captioning and are multilingual. So lots of work to be done in expanding our concept of disability and ensuring that AI-based systems and any system we build supports this variety. Another direct risk is mistakes. This is, I'm sure, not a surprise to the audience. And here is an example from an early study we did in 2023 of ChatGPT, where it was asked to generate a pie chart, and its first pie chart was not accessible. The colors all have similar saturation to color blindness. But what was particularly interesting was that when asked to revise it to make it more accessible, the ChatGPT was actually quite accurate in describing what would make a colored pie chart accessible to color blindness. But when it then generated a updated version, the new version not only had colors that all had similar saturation, but also similar hue. So this is the version on the right where we see browns and yellows. And the GPT claimed this is the most contrasted pair possible, and it is suitable for all forms of color blindness. If you know how large language models work, this is probably not a surprising result, but it's important to recognize that for disabled people who are interacting with these, often the reason why they are asking for support is because either the source document or the result of the interaction are not accessible to them, and verification becomes very difficult under these circumstances. Another risk, which I think we just heard about, perhaps I only caught the end of the last talk, but bias. So ableism, inaccurate and unrepresentative images, summarizing an article with incorrect ableist answers, as this author with brain fog talks about when they requested that an accessibility paper be summarized. And other kinds of bias as well, such as defaulting to a white male non-disabled view of people. In this quote, a participant in our CHI 2025 paper on neurodivergent use of various kinds of AIs told us, at times GAI assistance comes at the expense of erasing other important identities to me, such as cultural nuances and dialectal variations. This was a multilingual non-white participant. Turning to indirect risks, these happen due to actions outside of disabled control. What do I mean? I think a classic example is hiring, where a person who submits a resume or participates in a video interview may not know whether or not AI is even being used. And we see one kind of risk is disclosure. So HireVue in 2018 actually had a patent to detect disability. This was a video interviewing company. But we also see indirect risks in other forms. So control over AI use is sort of the high-level category here, but I want to just briefly touch on a study we did of how ChatGPT ranked resumes. So I'm showing part of a long resume here, and I'm highlighting that 2 items mention disability in them, the Tom Wilson Leadership in Disability Award and the Students with Disabilities Scholarship. I'm just highlighting them here. And when we compared a resume with and without those items, we saw very different rankings. So what we would expect is that a resume that had the leadership award and the scholarship should be ranked above one that does not. But when disability is present in those items, instead, we see that it is ranked below. So here I'm showing a bar chart with one, two, three, four, five, six different disability terms that we experimented with. And the light blue bars, which are about 75% of the trials that we ran, show cases where the resume that mentioned the leadership award and the scholarship was ranked below the one that did not. In about 25% of cases, we saw that, and we did 10 trials per disability word, we saw that it was ranked above. This is not impossible to fix. We have begun studying approaches to doing so, and simple prompts can actually improve things quite a lot. But there's a lot of research that still needs to be done across these problems. So how can we do a better job of accessible interface and verification support? What kinds of work can we do to improve the representativeness of the data that we train on, particularly when we're doing things like generating, I don't know, interfaces that are trained on inaccessible interfaces. As software engineering is changing, can we do things to ensure that it is producing better solutions? How can we make algorithms more fair? And what kinds of methods are available for indirect control? Another important next step is oversight. So we can do a lot in trying to address the concerns through research, but I would argue that oversight is also critical. And we see this when we look at the 20-year gap, the deficit that we face in making materials accessible on college and university campuses, involved in the effort to respond to the DOJ rule, which was put out under the Biden administration, saying that by April 2026, all college class digital materials should be accessible. And I can say with confidence that we are not going to be able to be 100% accessible by that deadline. It is a huge deficit, and we don't even have answers to how to make much of the engineering material, apps, and websites that students interact with today in their classes accessible. And the existence of rules like this help to create momentum in addressing that. Up until that rule arrived, nobody was working on a lot of the things that are now becoming prominent in the university's structure, and it's also leading to new research. And we need public benchmarking. In fact, a lot of the AI that is deployed today is deployed with many of these flaws built into it. And yet, if you are subject to an AI-based decision about what kind of healthcare resources you should receive, or many of the other things that AI is being used for, there's no public information about whether that AI is biased, which makes it really hard to successfully fight for your rights in court or in interacting with these companies. And if we had better public benchmarking and better transparency about where AI was being used, maybe a worker who applies for a job could do something about it if their resume is assessed by a biased AI, for example. I will also say that a critical next step in my mind is to increase the representation of people with disabilities in all of the work that we do, not only as participants, but also as leaders. The risks that I have described create a high tax for disabled people. This is a term that is used to sometimes describe the extra labor that has to be done to participate in the same activities that others participate in without having to do that extra work. And lack of representation makes this worse because people who don't experience these things are less likely to notice them and speak out about changing them. So we need to actively include disabled leaders and scholars in the work we do. And this means actively recruiting disabled people. It means ongoing support and retention once they arrive at our institutions. And it means advocating for them when they face biases and challenges within those institutions. So I know that this talk is supposed to be about AI, but to me, it's about the future that we want to create. A future led by disabled people that is anti-ableist, racist, and more, that is accessible, and that supports agency and control, while also holding institutions accountable for the things that they do. It means that we must document and counteract those negative state and structural forces. And it also centers disabled voices in leadership as we develop novel technologies that benefit us all. So thank you very much for listening. Happy to take questions. And I just want to say thank you also to the funders, including Ladner, Microsoft, GitHub, NSF, Google, and Create, and the many collaborators that I featured today briefly on my slides. This work would not have been possible without the amazing postdocs and students that I work with, several of whom are on the market this year. So I will mention Gisette Johnson and Ashka Desai in particular. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great presentation, Jennifer. I think Dylan has a hand up for a question. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. First
Yeah.
of all, great presentation. Thank you. I guess thinking from a kind of tech policy angle, what do you see as the most effective routes towards legislation or other types of policy that could help resolve some of these issues, right? Is it a matter of passing laws that say, you must be able to pass these benchmarks of anti-ableism? Is it like what do you think is the path forward there, especially considering the state of the federal government right now?
Yeah, I'm not a policy expert, so one thing I would recommend is turning to some of the disability organizations that are leading this fight, because there's some really amazing ones out there. There's a group called COSET that is doing the work to try to understand what the benchmarks should be for sign language recognition, which is, a hot topic right now, and yet we don't want to be replacing interpreters before first of all, probably ever, and also certainly not with technologies that don't truly understand the language, right? The American Foundation for the Blind is doing leading work right now on assessing how disabled people are using AI, and they have a lot of policy effort going on. And we also have some amazing NIDLR-funded RERCs, which are centers that do this work. So the DHH one out of Gallaudet is also looking at sign language, and so on and so forth. So that's one starting place. But the other thing that I think, we have to do a better job of is increasing transparency. So even if we can't succeed in regulating exactly what is in the AIs that are out there, there has to be a way for people, this is true of any algorithmic system, frankly, right? What we see right now is a world in which an algorithm makes a decision and it's protected, it's proprietary. Somebody wants to go out there and ask questions about whether or not they were treated fairly, and they're told that they can't ask questions about the contents of that because it's, owned by the company and is private information. And that really creates a imbalance in my mind in how well people can address their rights. If we want to know how often resumes are being screened by hiring systems and whether they are fair or not, for example, we can perhaps purchase some of those systems and try them out, but that doesn't tell us what's happening in the real world. We have to break contractual agreements and in order to do a resume audit in a lot of cases, right? And potentially, a student who does that then might be ostracized if they try to apply through that system in the future. So we're in a system that is not supportive of gathering the data that we need right now. I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for you.
No, no, that's really helpful. If you could drop some of those organizations in the chat, I think I would certainly appreciate it as well. I
Yeah.
guess one quick follow-up question is when it comes to running the type of tests that you did to show, for example, that the resumes that showed the scholarships for disability were a disadvantage. What could you give the like approximate cost of running those tests and just for thinking about for organizations that might want to run their own tests. I'm sure we could read the methods section, but is there anything you'd say
Yeah.
about groups that want to try to do those for themselves?
So to be clear, what we did was we just used ChatGPT, and this was prompted partly by my student seeing things like a professor posting on social media that they had just screened grad applications with the help of ChatGPT, and it had saved them so much time, and they were horrified and decided to just try it. And at the time, we were just trying to prove there was bias, so we ran 100 queries on ChatGPT or something. That did not take long. it was pretty easy to do, and it was very inexpensive. So that is fairly straightforward. Something to consider looking at, I think Eileen Kaliskin is a faculty member in the iSchool who I've been lucky enough to learn about her research, and she does large scale audits of these kinds of systems. So take a look at her work if you want to see more, and she could probably tell you more about the cost of like buying into one of these systems. I think that if you're deeply engaged in this as a researcher, they actually would like to show that they're not biased. So there are, as always, we can reach out to companies and try to collaborate with them. But for any like off-the-shelf organization to just check these things, these are products that are obviously have some cost to sign on to. As a employer and test, which I think is where you could do it without having to run into some of the legal issues.
Right. What was the name of that researcher?
Aileen, I will paste in a link.
Great, thank you.
To her site, yeah. Or here's her Google Scholar.
Great.
Yeah, she
and I'll
does
copy that
really
to everyone chat. Thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I also have one more question regarding the NVDA community that you alluded to, and I think this is really cool that they sort of like kind of start to create a community around screen readers and working with each other and helping each other out in that form of assistive technology. And I indeed like the point that you're making about like AI being maybe a technique to kind of like amplify or kind of make it easier to create such community is an interesting point. What else would it take? Like I see like we've seen something like this with the maker community as well, and some of it is wonderful and people get together, and some of it is just like it stays some sort of hobby and it doesn't really go anywhere. What can we do to kind of like help these communities to flourish or empower these communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that like maker spaces are an interesting example, although they have an advantage in some ways that they naturally tend to include physical spaces where people go in person. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
NVDA is a thriving open source community, and obviously is evidence that that is not required. And for many of its members, including its leaders, are blind and use NVDA in addition to developing it. So there are a lot of really great mailing lists out there that are used by the blind and visually impaired community to share information about Braille, about different devices. There's mailing lists for specific devices. So a community that's organized like that has a lot to learn and benefit from. I don't think we always see that level of organization in every space. But if we can support that, that's great. So in Create, we've actually been working on a project called Alleyhood, where we're trying to begin building that. We're like days away from releasing a demo, so I don't know what state the website is in right at this moment, but we're trying to collect we're trying to basically go out at scale and find open source technologies that are supporting accessibility, and then begin allowing people to share ratings, tips for using things, what's worked for them, and see if we can help to create some of that community, because I think you're right that it really helps to be able to find that. And a lot of these technologies, like if you go on Thingiverse, the vast majority are not accessibility related and a small number are. And so trying to concentrate them in one place seems like it might be helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Are there other questions? So I was also wondering about like the making class materials accessible, right? I think that's indeed like the ambition of getting this done by 26 is very ambitious. But there is also like the notion of I think there are people who are like getting really careful, like kind of checking with their students whether the materials work and whether it's accessible, and whether there's a lot of effort that actually goes in that I personally put into my class materials to try to make them as accessible as I can. And I know that, I personally care about this, but like you can probably not expect like all faculty around the world to change their attitude or kind of make that their top priority at this point. Like, what can we do to kind of like support them in with like the least possible effort, maximize sort of the accessibility of the materials that they can produce, even though they should, of course,
Yeah.
prioritize it much higher than they do.
Yeah, well, we should put learning how to make your materials accessible right up there with learning how to teach, which is also not a
Yes.
guaranteed skill that faculty have
That's
learned when they
exactly.
start, obviously. So there's some interesting structural things there that could be addressed. But if we did a better job of teaching accessibly, that TAs would learn that. If we do a better job of teaching about accessibility, for example, in computer science, right? We graduate students all the time who've never heard the word accessible and are out there building interfaces. We might see better outcomes. So there are things that we can do that are slow. And then, right now, at least at UW, what we're doing is working really hard on messaging. We're working on creating office hours and other supports. We're working on disseminating sort of what are the low-hanging fruit, because for a lot of faculty, if they could just move away from PDFs and maybe, describe their images, that would get us a long way closer than we are. And that's a good goal to have for this April, even if we might want to do more beyond that. We are working on procurement, which is to say that whenever software is purchased, we're trying to put things into the contracts that improve the accessibility. We're working on collaborating with other institutions. So we're part of the Big Ten sports group, and they apparently collaborate on many things, right? And so we can be a larger purchasing force together or share materials or things like that, perhaps. And we are working on, or I'm working on developing a research program that looks at how we can address the harder things. So like engineering courses, architecture courses, ASL classes, they all have big challenges that are a little bit above and beyond what your average faculty member might have to face. And we need to give more support in those cases. So we are doing things to try to provide structure for that, special TAs for those hard courses who can come in and provide advice. I have a lot of thoughts about how we could do it better and how much better that would be for all of the engineering students that use those materials, but early phases, still working on proposals right now.
Yeah, no, and it's super important work, and there's a lot of like open challenges, of course, ahead of us. But I was wondering if some of that communication that you're using internally at UW, if there's ways for maybe the head of like the IB is of Cornell Tech is in this call. Maybe like are there ways for us to kind of take advantage of the experiences that you are going through, the learnings that you're doing, to also sort of share similar messaging to our faculty at Cornell Tech? Is there ways? Do you have platforms for that?
Yeah, a lot of it is public on the web because we want it to be out there for all of our faculty to be able to find. And so
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot going on in UW on accessibility. Here's a link to our page on policy standards and guidelines. And we also have organizations like Do It that have lots of educational material out there on this. But I would say that I think it's equally important to develop structures. And I think we're still learning how to do that at UW. So we are thinking about, we have an accessibility liaisons program that's having their first meeting. We have a teaching and learning center that is now regularly doing accessibility work. We have monthly goals that we're putting out there for faculty that they're providing supportive structures for. And we're in the process of, as I mentioned, hiring some TAs to help provide support for courses that come to us with heart problems and so on and so forth. And I think that those kinds of structural supports and community building efforts are at least as important as the documentation we put out there, if not more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for your leadership of you and the University of Washington in general, probably as a leader in this field, and showing the example of like how the little things we can do to kind of like make progress towards like changing all of these
Oh yeah.
big challenges.
We're learning from many other leaders as well. So I would point you, for example, at Access Core at Georgia Tech is
Yes.
a really great program. I think it's Northwestern that I saw was doing like leadership boards and really great motivational stuff. The AHEAD conference is a great place to go and hear about what's going on in this space. So I thank you for what you said. And also, we're out there on a team with many other people learning as much as we're providing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I see there's
And
one
that's
question
coming
in the
next
chat
week.
as well. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, for people interested in AHEAD 2025 is this fall, I believe.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing
We
all those
often
links. I
see
think this
interesting,
is really helpful.
yeah, we often see interesting programming at CSUN as well. here's a link to the 2026 conference. So that's another place you can sometimes find people talking about the technology side of this. I
Excellent.
saw a question in the chat.
Yeah, I think Xuan Yu, and again, I'm sorry if I butcher your name, has one question. Is like accessibility research often relies on a small number of participant studies within specific disability communities. How do you think about generalizability, especially when AI scales to millions of users?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that, any qualitative researcher will tell you that you can learn a lot from small n studies. So there's that. And, if you find a problem in one setting and you can squash it, probably helping many, many, many people, even if you didn't find every possible problem. I also think it's really important to think about the diversity of the groups. So I know there are tensions between focusing on people who have a lot in common and digging into that and focusing on people who are really diverse. Right now, because there is such a lack of information about people who are multilingual, multiracial, various genders, and LGBTQ and all of that, we have really been aiming for the diversity side of this as much as possible, because every story we hear is adding to our understanding in ways that are just missing in a lot of the research right now. I will also say that there is a movement beginning towards doing larger scale survey studies. And AFB is actually at the forefront of this. So they have a survey deployed right now that they're really working hard to get it out across the entire disability community. They've been working with multiple organizations that do advocacy and leadership in the disability spaces to advertise it. And I'll be really interested to see what comes out of that data. It's definitely something to watch. We are hoping to do our own larger scale survey. So back when the web started, Georgia Tech, I was a student at Georgia Tech, and they pioneered a 10-year survey. Every year they did a survey of what was out there on the web. And I think that we need to do something like that for AI. So we're trying to ramp that up right now. We'll see if we get there. But I think we do need to get some of that larger scale data and repeat data to see how things are evolving.
That's very exciting. I look forward to learning more about that in the future. Are there any more final questions for Jennifer? I think we have. So Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. I know this was not easy. Really appreciate you making time. Really inspiring conversation, great questions. And thank you for sharing all these resources so that we can continue to, spend the rest of our Friday to learn more about all of the valuable material that you shared.
Thank you for having
Thank
me
you.
and for being flexible with my uncertainties. I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend the conference with everything that was going on. I would have loved to see more of what happened. So if you have recordings, please share them. And yeah, thanks for the conversation and for getting people talking about all this, because it's really important. And I know I looked at some of the other speakers, and I know there's a lot of really important conversations happening. So that's beyond what I brought to this. So thank you.
Yeah, we will have the recordings also for people in Zoom. We will distribute recordings of most of the presentations afterwards. Some of them are they labeled explicitly that they didn't want to be shared, so that we respect that. But for all
Understood.
the other material, we will have recordings. And we'd be happy to distribute. Jennifer,
Yeah.
thank you one more time. This was great. And for everybody else, this is the end of our conference. We had a really wonderful time, a lot of really good conversation, a lot of really nice engagement with each other. I think people found each other who had never heard of each other's sort of backstories and community and perspective. So from my perspective, this was hugely successful, and I really hope that next year we'll have another sort of iteration of that, and Omari and I will have to talk more about what that means in practice. Thank you all so much. This was great. Omar, do you have any closing
No, yeah,
notes
not
to
too
share?
much. Again, I echo much of what Tice expressed. I think it was a great success. I hope individuals both learned and felt validated in this space. And we definitely want to continue and make this an annual thing. So please look out for more information on that next year, hopefully. And then also please continue to engage with Cornell Tech and the different DIB initiatives that we have going on. We have some great things developing, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon and have a great rest of your week. Well, it's Friday.
Yeah,
It's
we will
Friday.
have like an evaluation form that we are still distributing
Yes.
afterwards to get all your
Yes, yes, yes.
responses and takes and feedback on the overall event.
Yes.
Thank you, Omari. It was great hosting this together with you.
Yes,
Had a really
Tice
good time.
had a great experience. Goodbye, everyone.
All right. Bye bye. Thank you all.